now I'd like to invite Ursula Burns, the CEO of Xerox and someone I'm a shameless fan of, to join me on stage. So please welcome Ursula. So perhaps not surprisingly, Ursula and I are here this morning to talk about how we can all do a better job of including and empowering those who are too often not included and empowered in the formal economy, particularly in the tech sector, notably women and minorities. Ursula and I were talking backstage. This is not the first time that we've shared a stage together or the first conversation that we've had on this issue. And yet we take some comfort from the fact that more and more people seem to be paying attention to this conversation, and more indifferent voices than just ours are joining and pushing forward the conversation. One of the reasons Ursula has been burdened to be a leader in these conversations is because of the success that she has had at Xerox in empowering women and minorities. She at Xerox has a much higher percentage of both women and minorities executives than her peer group, certainly in the tech space, but really in the Fortune 500 at large. Could you talk a little bit about kind of why this has been such a focus for you, and why you think, as we like to say, investing in women and girls isn't just the smart thing, isn't just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do?
Yeah, this is, I actually had the benefit of not having to create a great idea. I actually walked into or create momentum. I walked into a company 36 years ago that had a foundation rooted in two things that we knew were important, or that the founders of the company knew were important. And one was people, and the second was this idea about innovation. So where we are today as a company, thinking about where we started 75 years ago, we made copying machines. It was a pretty cool thing. We created a whole industry. Everything was fine. And then these little devices started popping up that made copying less and less necessary. Boo. We say boo to that. But
may you live in interesting times, Ursula.
Yeah, we do live in interesting times. What we ended up finding out was that we needed two things to solve any problem that we ran into. Two things always was part of the solution. One was people, having great people surround the problem or the opportunity. And the other one is innovation. This kind of, this desire, the strength that you have to face the unknown with your full front and try to attack it. Interestingly enough, these two things kind of intersect, innovation and people, around the word diversity, which you would never think, right? So we serve clients all over the world. We have problems that are generated all over the world, or should be and could be solved all over the world. And we found that if we had a team of people who were, we know that they're all talented. We hire from the great schools. We know that they work hard. They have great upbringings. But they had to have one other ingredient, which was a mix of experiences, a mix of backgrounds, a mix of perspectives on the world that could help us to look at problems in a broader way. So instead of being just a copying company when we started, what we found out we was a business process company. We took this business process called reproduction of originals on paper, and said instead of doing it by writing it every single time, we applied innovation, and we actually transformed this business process into a new business process. So when we were running into some technical difficulties in our company from a growth perspective, one of the things that we had to do was step back and figure out, what did we really do as a company? We didn't make copying machines. We actually changed business processes by applying innovation. And so that's what we do now. We make copying machines, by the way, printing machines, fax machines, but we also run business processes for large organizations and governments around the world. Things like finance and accounting processes that are pretty standard, easy paths for making road transportation more sustainable, easier, et cetera. So it's this idea that you take people, diverse people, throw it at a problem with innovation at its core, and you can solve all of the problems. When we did that, by the way, we were able to actually change the perspective of the company. We were able to actually attract even more diverse candidates and attract really good and diverse leaders. And so, yeah, it's like, I think it's a joyous and a virtuous cycle that you get into.
One of the other conversations we were having before coming out this morning was about sort of the tyranny of measurement, which I say as someone who loves data and who loves measuring and metrics, and yet recognizes that not everything can be measured, but certainly everything can be assessed. But sometimes the assessment doesn't come in the hard data that so many of us constantly are clamoring for. And I would think that is particularly true, admittedly, in a tech company. Could you talk about how you have sort of created a culture in your company of kind of where what can be measured should be measured, but what can't be measured should be felt?
We were talking about this backstage. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, BS, MS in mechanical engineering. Everything has a solution. Every single solution can be measured. You can measure progress. This is the way we're trained. It's interesting that when you're speaking about what I call the personality of a company or the soul of a company, it's very difficult to measure it in the time frames or with any kind of certainty that we measure just about everything else in business. I can measure cash flow, I can measure profits, I can measure revenues. I can even assess whether our people are happy or not with all kinds of scoring tricks that we have. The one thing you can't really measure that you have to assess and feel is what I call the personality of the company. So what's at the core? And I'm going to use a little bit of an example. We are extremely successful at diversity at Xerox. By the way, our extreme success means nothing when you look at the goal that we're shooting for. We're way behind the goal. So we have every single program you can imagine. We have flex time. We have child care initiatives. We have mentoring programs, everything you can imagine. And with this big push, with a woman CEO, a woman CFO, half my board are women, we have everything you can imagine that's focused towards women. We are still way behind, and we get stuck occasionally. And one of the reasons why is that with all of these programmatic things, we still hadn't changed sufficiently enough the soul of the company towards diversity and inclusion. And so this is what you have to do there is not try to measure anymore, and it's not necessarily programmatic. You have to literally sit and feel with the teams. I was using it as an example with Chelsea earlier. We have an organization in our company that is what we call a white island. It's an organization that consistently has significantly more white males in it than anyone else, and sometimes all of the organization is white male. And by the way, we hired these white males, so they're not we hired them and they work for us for a long time, so we've also created them. And what I had to do is sit with this organization, just continuously and talk about what does the organization do? How does the organization feel? It's not like, so why aren't you doing diversity? It's a little bit more kind of free-flowing conversation, and you can see that there are challenges there, that there are challenges in what their perspective of women are or their perspective of minorities are, and you have to kind of get to that level. There is no measurement that I could find except for, in the end result, that we have more and more people in. And it's not, we didn't, every program is available to this group. The thing that wasn't there was this leading from the front, the leader from the front, or the leaders of the group actually buying into the solution that we know is there, which is that inclusive work environments perform better than non-inclusive work environments.
And you're clearly proving that over and over again.
We are. Thank you.
To ensure that you can continue to build an inclusive company, you need to have an increasingly inclusive pipeline. And one thing I know that we've also talked about before, and something that we've been highly focused on through CGI, is how do we ensure that more people can see themselves growing up to be heads of companies like Xerox. And this is an area where we have lost ground. And admittedly, it's an area that I think of in the arc of my own life. When I got my first computer from Compaq, one of those kind of big, many pound computers with that strange green screen, in 1987 from Santa Claus, women were, you can.
indicates her age. In 1987, I knew there wasn't a Santa Claus.
Yeah. Oh, no, I definitely still knew there was a Santa Claus, and I'm really planning on Charlotte knowing that there's a Santa Claus, so please don't tell her that there isn't one for years. And yet, in 1987, women were more than 1 out of 3 computer science graduates. And when I graduated from Stanford in the heart of Silicon Valley in 2001, women were about 1 out of 4. And last year, women were less than 1 out of 5. And so even though the denominator has grown, more universities and community colleges are offering not only computer science classes, but also mechanical engineering programs and everything in the so-called STEM fields, we are losing ground. And this has to be of concern to you at Xerox. And so what are you doing as a company to not only ensure that you're finding kind of the best today, but also helping to grow the best tomorrow?
And this is this is the single most passionate area that I am personally in our company is focused on. And this is including into this the future problem solvers, more and more women and underrepresented minorities in STEM subjects. So we've done everything. There are so many initiatives here going on and not improving results. So one of the fundamental things that we've done, President Obama asked me to lead an initiative on STEM, and one of the things that we did early was to realize that we didn't need another program. There's not another program needed. And quite honestly, right now, we didn't even want more money. Money was not the problem, and more programs weren't the problem. The big problem is, can we actually put money behind the programs that actually work? And how do you know whether a program works? And this was in the United States. We did this. With the Business Roundtable, a group of Fortune 500 CEOs, we made a commitment to take all of the programs that we're working on in the STEM area, assess them, have an independent assessment organization assess them for effectiveness and success and long-term success, trackability, et cetera, you name it. And actually to take 10% of our philanthropy budget that's focused on education and move that towards STEM programs that work. So literally stop investing in things that we loved and were often named after us. You know, we named it ourselves as the XYZ program, the Xerox consultant program, whatever. I know you love it. If it doesn't work, proving that it's worked, can you move money to programs that do work, may have a different name, you know, all this stuff, because what we wanted to do was actually literally change the equation. So we started this organization. That's an organization that helps at the center to direct companies that want to invest in effective programs. We started an organization called Change the Equation, interestingly enough, to actually do this. That's one. Another thing we found out was that you have to start early. Every single time I get involved with first universities, and you realize the universities are pulling from high schools. Then you have to get in and say the high schools are pulling from grade schools. So right when I thought you could actually kind of surround it to one group of people, you had to keep going further and further back. So taking an inclusive and broad-based look at what we do. And then the third thing is standards that are really high for our children is important. And this is not only for women and underrepresented minorities, this is in general, because we are literally producing in this nation graduates that are not as competitive as they should be able to be in the world at large, particularly STEM graduates. And so we have to absolutely make sure that we have standards that work. Those three things that I talked about didn't really focus necessarily on women and underrepresented minorities, but they actually are focused on women and underrepresented minorities. We drive it for those three things. The fourth area is we absolutely have to have examples for these kids. We have to celebrate. It's amazing. One of the things that a really great friend of mine, his name is Dean Kamen, who started this organization called FIRST, anybody who knows Dean, he hooked me 15 years ago on FIRST by asking me who won the World Series or the Super Bowl, I guess, the football thing, the Super Bowl, who won the World Series or the Super Bowl, and I could tell him at least some of the teams' names. I didn't know who won exactly, but I knew who was playing. Then he asked me who won the Nobel Prize for physics or chemistry or XYZ. I couldn't even tell him who was playing in the game. And his point was that we celebrate things and people will engage with what we celebrate. So the question for him is, how do we start, and for me every single day is, how do we start to celebrate more the work that engineers and scientists do? One of the reasons why I agree to sit in places like CGI, in addition to the fact that you asked me to come here, and I'm a big fan of yours, is that I want people to know that engineers and scientists look like me. That's who I am. I was just a regular, a regular person born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan who happened to, luckily, engage in a set of educational initiatives that ended up in degrees in engineering. That shouldn't be by luck that you ended up there. It should be more programmatic, more purposeful, that we get more and more people engaged here. If we don't solve this problem, if we don't solve this problem for anyone, men and women, but if we don't solve it for women and underrepresented minorities, for sure they will continue to be only 5% of the CEOs in Fortune 500 being women. There will continue to be wage disparities that are shocking still in the United States, where a woman makes 78 cents for every dollar a man makes. This is a real country. We track everything, right? We know everything that goes on, and we still have this cluster of inequality that can be affected, but it's not going to be affected by one program or one person. It can be affected by stepping out a little bit and owning, stepping out a little bit and owning part of the problem. Putting that all together, we should be able to make progress. By the way, progress is being made. It's not like we're standing still, but nowhere near at the rate that you would expect it in a developed country. And forget about the developing countries.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Ursula that we need all of these complementary efforts, but that helping to close the imagination gap is really important. I think it's hard for all of us to be able to imagine ourselves as what we can't see. And I feel this way so strongly, as I was telling Ursula backstage. I included her in my recent book, which is called It's Your World, and looks to explain some of the big challenges in our world to middle school-aged kids in our country and across the world. And I talk about Ursula and also Marie Curie and other women that I really admire. Marie Curie, who's the only person to have won a Nobel Prize in 2 disciplines.
Right, 2 different disciplines.
Not only the only woman, the only person. Because I think it is important that we celebrate pioneering women like Ursula and Marie Curie, and that kids grow up knowing those stories alongside cheering for whomever their favorite football team is. And so I'm very grateful that you continue to come and share your story, because it is kind of your challenge, being the only African-American woman in the Fortune 500 as a CEO, to continue to stand up and say, you might be the first, but you shouldn't be the only, and that is actually good for all of us. Yeah. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, please. And
whistles. How bad.
And yet we know we need people who don't look like you to also be having these conversations and be leading their companies in the same way that you have chosen to lead your company, both from a strategic standpoint as well as an ethos standpoint. Are CEOs in your cohort reaching out to talk to you, to ask you about what you've done at Xerox? Are you starting to see kind of this mentality, but also this inclusiveness be a driving force for CEOs across your sector, but also across the spectrum?
The answer is yes. Yes, and not only
yes, but.
Yes, there is a but, of course, right? Yes, and not only to me. I'm not the oracle of all information. I'm not. What worked for Xerox may not be able to work for the companies and other companies, and what worked for me almost surely won't be able to work for other individuals. But so yes, and there are 3 types of companies, at least 3. One are companies who they get it, they understand it's hard work, they understand it's time. That leadership matters, that there's not a quick fix, that it's going to take time, it's going to take hard work and investment. And these companies are just, they're marching, and doing great things and experimenting, and sometimes failing, but moving the needle. All kinds of great companies in that category. There are some companies in the middle who are being pushed from the outside to do something, left to their own devices. They have other things that they would worry about, revenue, profit, short term, the quarter. They would just kind of focus on that. But they do have constituents either inside, shareholders, customers who are saying, how come I eat all of this food, you sell all of this food to people like me, but there's nobody like me who actually makes it or makes decisions about it or governs the infrastructure of it, et cetera, that middle set of companies. And I think that that's the vast majority, either the middle or the passionate about it. Surprising to me, though, is that there are a lot of companies, small set of them, but larger number, who don't give a hoot, who actually think that it's kind of okay, or there's some other external factor that causes lack of participation of women and minorities, and so they don't really get too engaged. The good news about those companies is they'll be gone over time. I mean, but really, you can think about it all, any way you want to. The numbers just don't work. The numbers do not work over the long term if you do not tap in to 50% of the population. Okay, we're just not going to engage those. They can't even really be good consumers because they don't have enough money to buy the stuff that these people are making. And then 27% so you got 75, 78% of the population, literally, that you're saying is not capable or I'm not going to engage in my value chain, and that's just not sustainable. So the good news about the small set is they either move to the middle and then to the end, or they just go away and are replaced with a company that gets it. One of the things that you were speaking about earlier is that we are, in the tech industry, we have to be really careful because we've created a new set of value statements. Like, before it was value statements like they could fit in, you could fit in, right? You could fit into the company, or women were too aggressive, right? There were all these like little code words that you could exclude people on. I think we're generating a new set of code words in tech that we have to be careful of, right? So every tech company talks about computer skills and people who can code, and in tech companies you need marketers as well, you need artists, you need writers, you need the entire population to contribute to this world. And because we are disproportionately underrepresenting women and minorities in these very fast-growing tech segments, particularly in the computer science and the data end, we are able to actually easily say, well, we can't get them, right? So I think we have to actually start thinking differently about first of all, how you start these people how you start girls and minorities from the beginning to the end. As you say, there's all these programs to do this. But then also, how do you engage in the companies, tech companies, in areas if you don't have the numbers right now, where you do have the numbers? You have to be able to push. And it's amazing that we actually have these huge, world-changing companies with very little representation at the board level, at the senior management level, at the employee level. It's amazing that they just started. They're brand new, so I figure you can start with the right mix, and not end up trying to fix it from something that started a long time ago. It turns out even that is not true. So it's continuing to push, continue to hold high standards, and continue. You said it backstage. I'm going to bring it in here. Please. Guilt helps a little bit. It's not really guilt, but you have to look at yourself in the mirror occasionally and say, is this right? Like, take all the other stuff away. Like I said, take profit away, take revenue away, take all that stuff away. Your position on the Fortune 500. Does this feel right? And if it doesn't feel right, you should do something about it. By the way, and if you can't make it, if you don't feel the right things, you'll eventually be replaced as well. So, I think this is a virtuous circle in the world. It just takes too long sometimes.
Well, clearly it doesn't take too long for Ursula. And I'm so grateful that you have again come to share your leadership on not only this issue, but on so many with us. And I certainly feel better about the world that we're living in because of your leadership. So Ursula, thank you very, very much. Please give her a round of applause. Thank you.